Think about the last time you got dressed in the morning. You opened a drawer, pulled out a shirt, maybe grabbed a jacket on the way out. 30 seconds, zero effort. But roughly 24,000 years ago, during the coldest point of the last ice age, getting dressed was the difference between being alive at noon and being dead by sunrise. Temperatures on the Eurasian Steppe dropped to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Exposed skin began dying within minutes, and the humans living through it had no synthetic fibers, no down insulation, no zippers, just their hands, animal carcasses, and a problem that would kill them if they got it wrong. So how did they not only survive but push into environments that would kill a modern, well-equipped hiker in hours? The answer is not primitive guesswork. It is a sequence of innovations so precise and so sophisticated that researchers are still working out how they managed it. Start with the cold itself, because most people dramatically underestimate what negative 40 actually means. This is not uncomfortable. This is not bundle-up weather. At that temperature, the moisture in your breath freezes before it clears your face. Wind doesn't make you shiver. It shuts your body down in stages. A modern human in regular winter clothing dropped into the Eurasian steppe during the last glacial maximum would, in most scenarios, be dead within 2 to 4 hours. The popular image of Ice Age people is always the same. Dirty, barely clothed figures hunched over a small fire in a cave, barely making it through the night. That image is wrong in almost every detail. What the archaeological record actually shows is something far more impressive and far more deliberate. The first thing to understand is that they weren't wearing what most people picture. Around 30,000 years ago, one invention changed everything. The eyed needle. A small sliver of bone with a hole punched through one end, and with it, ancient humans could suddenly sew tight-fitted seams instead of just draping hides over their bodies. The difference between a draped fur and a fitted sewn garment is not cosmetic. It is thermal. A draped hide traps some heat. A tailored garment with close-fitting seams traps a layer of warm air directly against the skin. The exact same principle behind a modern winter jacket. Ice Age tailors selected different animal hides for specific layers. Inner layers from Arctic hare or birds, moisture-wicking and soft. Middle layers for insulation. Outer layers from wolverine or reindeer, which shed hoarfrost, blocked wind, and resisted moisture without matting down. 3 or 4 layers, each performing a specific thermal function. That is not primitive. That is engineering. The site of Kammengrubgraben in Austria, dating between 20,000 and 24,000 years ago, reveals exactly how deliberate this process was. During the height of the last glacial maximum, when temperatures plummeted to their worst, hunters at this site stopped hunting mammoths almost entirely. They switched to caribou, and the evidence shows exactly why. The caribou skulls still had their antlers attached, meaning they were killed in winter, specifically because winter is when caribou hide is at its thickest and most insulating. Tooth wear confirmed late autumn and winter deaths. These weren't hunters taking whatever they could find. They were managing a seasonal clothing supply, targeting specific animals at specific times of year because they understood the thermal properties of different hides in different seasons. In the same archaeological layer as the caribou bones, researchers found eyed bone needles. The connection is not coincidental. Now, here is where survival methods get genuinely creative, because clothing only solves half the problem. You also need somewhere to sleep, and the popular assumption, caves everywhere, gets the archaeology badly wrong. Most Ice Age humans did not live in caves, not caves. The evidence points somewhere else entirely. At sites in Ukraine, including Mezherish and Kostenki, researchers found something that stopped archaeologists cold when they first uncovered it. Houses. Actual engineered structures built entirely from woolly mammoth bones. Mammoth skulls, each weighing over 200 pounds, arranged as foundation blocks. Curved tusks set into dome frameworks. Hundreds of smaller bones interlocked to fill structural gaps. The entire assembly covered in multiple layers of stitched mammoth hide. See adds. Perimental reconstructions of these structures have confirmed what the archaeology suggested. A properly constructed mammoth bone house, heated by a modest interior fire, could maintain interior temperatures 40 to 50 degrees warmer than the outside air. Modern Arctic shelters with industrial insulation often achieve no better. Let that sink in. The insulation itself followed the same layered logic as the clothing. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, 26,000-year-old shelter walls were built in distinct layers. Animal hide on the inside, fur facing inward to trap warm air against occupants, dried grass and moss behind that, drawing moisture away from the living space. Woven bark and reed matting on the exterior, wind-resistant but breathable enough to let trapped moisture escape before it could freeze and structurally damage the shelter. Modern construction uses vapor barriers, insulating foam and weatherproof cladding. These shelters used hide, moss and bark. Different materials, identical physics. So either ancient builders independently derived the same thermal engineering principles that took modern science centuries to formalize, or humans have always been capable of solving hard problems when dying is the alternative. Both options are remarkable. Building a mammoth bone house took an estimated 2 to 3 weeks of sustained work by 8 to 10 adults, which means construction could not be reactive. It had to happen in late summer or early autumn, well before winter conditions made outdoor labour impossible. Analysis of tool wear patterns at these sites confirms exactly that timeline. These were not people scrambling to survive. They were planners operating with seasonal calendars running in their heads, making decisions in August about conditions they wouldn't face until December. The same planning governed food. In permafrost regions, underground storage chambers connected to shelters by short tunnels served as natural freezers. Meat cached from autumn hunts stayed frozen and accessible through the worst winter storms. Months later, without any technology beyond a hole in the ground and an understanding of how permafrost works. Fire inside these structures was not simply a flame in the middle of the room. It was a managed heating system. At Kostenki, the evidence shows central hearths providing primary heat, with smaller secondary hearths distributed around the perimeter to create warm zones for specific activities. Infants and elderly placed nearest to the warmest positions. Tool making and food preparation assigned to specific thermal zones. The fuel itself was engineered. In the treeless steppe, wood was not always available, so ancient humans developed alternatives. Dried mammoth dung, carefully prepared for burn efficiency. Bone, processed in specific ways to maximize heat output. Chemical analysis of hearth residues shows these fuels were deliberately treated before burning, not simply thrown on a fire, but managed for specific thermal outputs. They were not burning whatever they could find, they were managing fuel like a resource. Ventilation is the part of this story most people miss entirely, and it is the part that modern Arctic engineers find most surprising. In any enclosed shelter, moisture from breathing, cooking, and body heat accumulates. In sub-zero temperatures, that moisture freezes. Ice builds up inside walls, inside structural joints, inside insulation layers. The structure fails from within. The archaeological evidence at Kostenki shows that Ice Age builders solved this with deliberate airflow design. Small openings near ground level drew in fresh cold air. Larger apertures near the top allowed warm, moisture-saturated air to exhaust upward and outward. This is not accidental. This is the same stack ventilation principle used in modern passive building design, arrived at independently 20,000 years ago, by people who had never heard of thermodynamics but understood perfectly well what happened when a shelter rotted from the inside out. Hunting in these conditions required its own layer of ingenuity, because feeding a group through an Ice Age winter meant securing enormous quantities of meat before temperatures made prolonged outdoor activity dangerous. In eastern France, Ice Age hunters used fire itself as a herding tool. They set coordinated blazes every fall and spring to drive migrating herds of wild horses and reindeer into a narrow valley below a limestone formation known as the Roche de Solutré. Animals funneled into the valley could be killed efficiently at close quarters, meat dried and stored in quantity. Archaeological evidence shows this operation continued for tens of thousands of years at the same site, which means the location, the technique, the seasonal timing, all of it was memorized, transmitted, and executed accurately across hundreds of generations without a single written record. That is not luck. That is a knowledge system. The personal toolkit found at the Milovice 4 site in the Czech Republic, dating to roughly 30,000 years ago, makes the individual dimension of this survival picture clear. 29 stone tools, arranged as if originally bundled in a leather pouch, found together in a single deposit. Blades for cutting, points for hunting, scrapers for hide processing. Each tool selected and carried deliberately by a single hunter-gatherer, operating in one of the coldest environments humans had ever occupied. The entire kit fits in one hand. It represents a complete survival system, compact, portable, and curated with the care of someone who understood exactly what each piece was for and what the consequences were of being without it. No item was redundant, nothing was carried for sentiment. What connects all of these methods, the layered clothing, the engineered shelters, the managed fires, the coordinated hunts, the personal toolkits, is the same thing. None of it is instinct. Every single element required observation, memory, experimentation, and the transmission of hard-won knowledge from one generation to the next. A child growing up in a mammoth bone house on the Eurasian Steppe had to learn how to select the right hide for the right layer, how to sew a seam tight enough to hold against wind, how to manage a fire in an enclosed space without suffocating the people sleeping around it, how to read seasonal signs and begin building before winter arrived. That learning took years. It was passed from adults who had learned from their own parents in an unbroken chain stretching back further than any written language, any city, any civilization. Military Arctic training programs today teach shelter-building methods derived from the archaeological reconstruction of these exact structures. Disaster relief organizations have adapted the same layered insulation principles for emergency use in extreme environments. Ancient humans solved these problems perfectly, with bones and stone tools, and we spent most of recorded history not knowing they had done it at all.